This time, it's different. This is actually a threat.
It's smarter than you. All the other technologies in the past, people are trying to choose what to do with them on a basis of choice that doesn't include everyone on Earth, including them being dead. Not right now, but in the predictable place it's going. Understands reality better than you do, makes better choices, goes outside the box better, has more of a spark of creativity, of invention, of creative, unexpected uses of the world around it, better at manipulating you. You to it are an object whose rules it knows better than you understand yourself. My guess is that babies are not conscious.
Why? One thing that I think people here, the normal people, not you guys, because every person I've talked to here does like AI or ML research. It's like wait, I'm actually so curious. Hold on. How many of you guys work in something like AI or ML like related? Okay, yeah, decent amount. That's kind of weird. Okay. I wonder sometimes, no, okay. So here's a question. A lot of people have heard this thing is going to be the next thing in 5 years. I think I've heard about self-driving cars like almost since I was in college. That we were right around the corner from it, and it seems like today we're no closer than we were in the past. Or that the next version of ChatGPT or I know art generators were really big for a point in time, and now at least publicly we're not talking about it as much. If there was somebody hypothetically that said, okay, you're saying this thing about AI, but people have said this about all technology, and it's always 5 years away, and Elon's been talking about Neuralink, and it's not happening, and blah, 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 blah. What would be like the one or two most convincing arguments you'd have for them that, well, this time it's different, this is actually a threat?
Timing is much harder to predict than endpoints.
I agree, yeah.
I was not in the self-driving car brigade. I was I obviously was going to get solved eventually, but it wasn't clear to me that it was going to be solved and legalized before the end of the world, though things on the legal front are now looking interesting. Things on the technology front are allegedly looking interesting. I haven't checked in detail. It's much easier to, in 2001, I did not predict that this stuff was going to become an issue in 20 years. I predicted it was going to become an issue eventually. In 2004, I sketched out a scenario for how the world ends that involved a superintelligence cracking a special case of the protein folding problem. I could not have told you that the general case of the biological protein folding problem was going to be cracked in 2020 by AlphaFold 2. I could not have timed it. Might not even have been confident that you could predict biological protein folding in full generality as opposed to choose a special case and engineer it. I definitely wouldn't have been able to predict that it could be done by, deep nets. Though AlphaFold 2 is legitimately more complicated than just a giant stack of deep nets like an LLM.
Do you think on the velocity thing, on the trajectory thing here, the first topic that we talked about was getting people to bet on outcomes as a way to kind of hold people accountable or make better predictions. Do you think that to some people, they would say that it feels unsatisfying that you can make such strong predictions about the endpoints of AI if those endpoints could be outside of everybody here's natural life cycle? That if this is happening in 200 years, I don't really care about it. I don't even want to think about it. Whereas if this is going to happen in 15 or 20 years, it suddenly becomes the most pressing thing for anybody to think about.
I would bet on 15 or 20 over 200 and possibly on 10 over 20. But that is much more me eyeballing things. That is me looking at how fast things have gone, and at the fact that GPT-4 got further than I expected the entire tech stack to stall out at. I was expecting GPT-3 to mostly stall out, and then GPT-4 did not. And maybe GPT-4 stalls out, but I don't know anymore.
What do you think what are technologies that people that are hesitant to believe in I don't want to call it doomerism because that sounds dismissive, but for people that don't think it's as big of a problem, what are the technologies that they should be eyeballing where you could be look at how insane that is? It is moving quickly. It is going to be a future problem.
I mean, again, timing is hard. Synthetic biology. If somehow AI were not being a thing, I would tell people to worry about synthetic pathogens such as COVID-19, but worse. It's a pretty gloomy fact that we I had the big synthetic pathogen disaster, and the reaction to this was that half of the United States doesn't want to take vaccines anymore. I consider it a blow against the theory that your small disasters will successfully immunize civilization against large ones. But yeah, synthetic pathogens can clearly get much worse than COVID-19. I think a bunch of people are worried about AI specifically enabling that. Even if AI were not going to be a thing, I would still be that's a thing to worry about. If AI were not going to be a thing, I'd probably start to worry about who's not having kids. If we're going to be around that long, but we're not, so moot point.
Okay. Was this a satisfying AI? where else do you want to explore on this one? I feel like how do you get, well, I'm curious. Okay, I want people to be interested in things that I care about. So I feel like for politics, now we sit on the other end of that as political people, whereas you're unwilling to put a timeline on anything. Political people's timeline is always like, tomorrow. This is the most important election. This is the most important problem. This is the most important piece of legislation. If you don't pass this, everything is over. Do you ever feel like a compulsion to push something ahead where it's like, hey, I know that this is like a fingerprint, but like you said, like 10 to 15 years, is this something we really need to start evaluating more? Is there anything like that? Or are you just like content kind of doing like the more theoretical side and, either believe me or don't?
I mean, if somebody were to dig up my manifold prediction market record, you would find that in the market on whether we're all dead in 2030, which resolves NA in 2027 to avoid the usual problem of is your model worth anything if the world ends? No. But, if it resolves NA in 2027, you can get like temporary boost by anticipating how other people will trade. So there's hopefully some incentive to like try to guess the right direction there. It's ultimately unbound from reality, of course. This is not a true virtuous prediction market, but it's hard to get those. Anyway, you would find that I initially placed like a limit order that was sell at 80% and buy at 40% for everyone dead by 2030. So unless I lied, unless I like poison the well by making non-epistemic trades and not announcing the fact, like you can tell that I don't think it's like all that likely to be very, very far out.
Okay. Are we satisfied?
But with this topic?
Yeah, is there anything else
that's up to you. I obviously have a not literally infinite, but unbounded supply of things to say in the sense that if I said all of them, I would have thought of more by the time I was done.
Sure. Well, what's next on the prediction market list?
All right. Let me pull it back up again.
Or actually, no, wait, real quick, because I'd be interested in hearing you say it. What is, I can think of in a general sense of an answer, but I'm curious, what would you say is the more specific threat that makes, the more unique threat about AI as opposed to other technologies in the past? Because
it's smarter than you. That's it. Like all the other technologies in the past, people are trying to like choose what to do with them on a basis of choice that doesn't include everyone on Earth, including them being dead. AI is choosing to do with itself. It's doing so using a more powerful ability to steer. It understands reality better than you do. Not right now, but in the predictable place it's going. Understands reality better than you do, makes better choices, goes outside the box better, has more of a spark of creativity, of invention, of like creative, unexpected uses of the world around it, better at manipulating you. You to it are an object whose rules it knows better than you understand yourself. Yeah, all of that. That is not something that was true of electricity.
Okay. All right. What's the next one?
Well, unfortunately, it's all got, I think, scrambled by moral claims are truth apt was on this list. Do we want to do that? I kind of don't want to do that. Do you want to do it?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Are newborns conscious?
How are we defining conscious?
Qualia.
How do we know?
Guess.
I feel like if I were to say a baby is a pea zombie, then half the people I've talked to on my stream would probably fit the same criteria. So I feel like babies must be conscious. But I'm curious, what is your argument to say they're not? Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that half the people on your live stream strike you as having less cognitive complexity than a newborn baby? I'm concerned. I'm wondering if there are
newborn
AIs
babies,
in this group.
Newborn babies are at least willing to learn. I'll say that. Yeah.
I see the snark. I'm guessing it's just snark, and they don't actually literally mean.
I'm getting closer every day to believing it, but for now it's snark, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, like.
No, I believe that people are fully cognitive, conscious creatures that are not philosophical zombies if they're smart enough to be operating a microphone and talking on a computer. Yeah.
Okay. So.
Back to the babies.
Well,
yeah.
Well, babies can't operate a microphone and talk on a computer. So there you go.
Well, they can speak into a microphone.
not deliberately. Well,
Okay, this is true, but I feel like most of the time I've spent talking to Ayla has been configuring her microphone, so I don't know if microphones are the best argument for for cognitive capabilities. No, okay, tell me, why do you think babies are conscious? I want to hear it. Let's hear it.
My guess is that babies are not conscious.
Yeah, why?
Because I think there's a bunch of like reflective circuitry of like identifying the ape that is this ape, that sort of like looks at your own internal cognitive process and looks at a piece of it and says like, this is a thing this is like a reified thing in the ontology, where if you imagine it, it then like causes a little piece of that cognitive process to be there. Like if you imagine a red thing, some little red appears in your visual cortex or an area downstream of it. This makes it seem very unlike an object in the outside world. You can't quite see how any number of atoms could ever add up to the thing that happens when you send your brain a instruction like visualize red. It seems like no matter how much you imagine atoms bopping around in your mental workspace, in your imagination, a little sense of redness never appears the way that it appears if you instruct yourself to imagine redness.
So I understand what you're saying in terms of, if I think I understand, that it's hard to imagine qualia, but why would we imagine that babies don't have it?
Well, what I'm saying is that, like, if I look at the processes for having qualia that it's hard to imagine atoms adding up to, my guess is that the babies aren't running it yet.
Yeah, I get so, because I've done more abortion debates than I care to recall, but it feels like when you're looking at the ability of something to deploy a conscious experience, what we're looking at is, because we can't really see one anywhere, or I'm not aware of any way to observe a conscious experience, it seems like we're looking at kind of like the underlying mechanisms, and we're trying to make a guess of, is there enough like circuitry communicating with each other and functioning at this point such that there's some conscious experience that's happening on top of it. And I feel like I don't know what is the significant alteration of brain mechanism that's changing as a baby goes from birth to 2 or 3 or 4 that would make you think that like now it's got the proper parts for conscious experience, but before it didn't.
I'm not sufficiently a student of developmental neuroscience and developmental psychology to take a guess as like where in 2 to 3, or even if it's done by 2 to 3. Mm-hmm. Though to be clear, like I'd be less surprised if a toddler was having conscious experiences. But what I was trying to do is like describe a guess of why qualia feel ineffable. I was trying to describe a guess of a mechanism whereby qualia feel ineffable. And then like it's complicated. And as long as consciousness appears to you like a blank mysterious substance, for all you know that blank mysterious substance could be inside babies, but it's not going to turn out to be a blank mysterious substance. You don't have to believe my guesses about it, but to believe that, like everything else in history that seemed simple and opaque, like life itself, it's just this like mysterious animating force of flesh, then for all you know, bales of straw can spontaneously generate flies or mice. But as soon as you understand like what life is, there's this enormously complicated machinery behind it. Mm-hmm. And consciousness isn't going to have that much complicated machinery behind it. It's going to be built on top of standard brain stuff. But like babies are quite simple. So if anything you know about, the more you know about what consciousness is, as soon as you know that there's a particular mechanism, you're going to be like, oh, babies are too simple to have that running yet. Give them a week at least.
Could one challenge you? Because I'm not going to. Well, no, couldn't I challenge you on that and say that it does feel like consciousness is a special type of thing that we might be able to draw a circle around all of the knowledge a human could ever possess, and understanding like the fundamental nature of consciousness, just because that is our frame that we view things through, that understanding that might just exist outside of that particular circle, and it's something we can never truly fully comprehend.
Like eyes are the one thing that you can never look at?
Well, but you can look at eyes in a mirror, right?
Yeah. And, if you'd grown up in a civilization that had already unraveled, like, what makes consciousness feel so mysterious, you'd have, like, grown up thinking of it as no more mysterious than life itself and the mysterious vitalic force.
Yeah, I agree that there are definitely things that exist that we didn't know before, that we do know now.
Yeah.
But it feels like I say this, I guess it's not true, but even in the past, we could envision ways to test for a lot of things like where, does blood keep you alive? Are germs real? Is string theory a good explanation of quantum mechanics? Like we can imagine all of these things, and we can try to, pose questions for like, how could we test for this particular thing? But it feels like conscious experience is a truly unique thing where I couldn't even imagine a way to test it. Like, let's say that I showed you, I imagine you would think, or maybe you won't, I don't want to put this in your mouth, but I would imagine that if you could create a sufficiently complex computer, you should be able to get everything working such that a conscious experience somehow appears there. I would imagine if you could emulate every. Yeah, but then the question would be, let's say that we feel like we've done that, how would we know if there was one there or not? I can't even like fathom a test for that.
Well, that's because you don't know what consciousness is. Let me put it this way. Do you think there exists an objective yes or no answer to the question, are you conscious?
Conscious is the only area where I will bow to dualism, and I don't know if I'm a hardcore physicalist, materialist, but I'm not sure. I think it's a really difficult question to ask. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I've done a lot of drugs, and sometimes I wonder if I'm conscious or not, or if other people are conscious or not. I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, I bring that up jokingly, but I think drugs are actually a really interesting way to explore a lot of what I think we take a lot for granted when it comes to our conscious experience and how much is going on under the hood to put together the crude approximations of reality that your conscious experience actually is. But I guess, yeah, when you ask questions about are germs real, is the sun hot, where do babies come from or whatever, it feels like even if it's hard to imagine where they come from, I can think of, or I can hypothesize a series of tests to get us closer to the answer for that. But I mean, I can't think of anything for consciousness, yeah.
Is that because babies are more real than consciousness? Or is that, or like fire is more real than consciousness? Or is that because you're confused about consciousness but not about fire?
I think babies are more real than consciousness. As weird as that is to say, because I feel like I can't think of anything else in the universe that is like an emergent property of underlying things that is actually a greater thing than the sum of its parts. That, like, I can't imagine a thing that if you put a bunch of things together, another thing appears, yeah.
If nothing else is like that, how about if you guess that consciousness isn't like that either?
Well, I could, but then I ask, well, what is the way that we can try to get any closer to understanding what it is? Like, do you think we're any closer to understanding what consciousness is now as we were 100 years ago?
In my case, yeah. Like, I used to be more confused about this than I feel right now.
Well, what is it? Share your thoughts with us.
So the question you want, so suppose I say that the question, why does consciousness feel ineffable, is guaranteed to have an answer in a way that the question, what is the ineffable nature of consciousness, is not. Would you agree with that?
Repeat it again to me.
Like, like you try to look inward and you see something very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And then your lips move and you say, I'm confused.
Okay.
And you had some like internal thought processes. If we could, like take tomorrow's fMRI machine and read your auditory cortex, we would like find that there was like more thoughts you had along the way to saying, I'm confused. And would you agree that these things are all like objective features of the universe?
I'm not sure if I would. I don't know. If you're talking about the underlying process that can be measured in a machine, then I think that the answer to that is obviously yes. It's a thing that's observable, testable. We've got ways to measure for it. But if we talk about the qualia, or like the semantic understanding of, or the actual experience of, like, is there a thing that knows what it's like to be a thing that's experiencing a thing? I don't know about that being a feature of the universe in the same way that like the brain itself is. Yeah.
But there has to be something that causes you to say all those words you said just now.
I agree. There's a lot of LSD. No, I'm just kidding. No, I agree. There is a thing, but that going back to my thing before, there's the underlying structure. And then to even go back to the baby thing, this is why I would assume that babies are conscious. The only way as humans, it seems to be, that we can imagine a conscious experience being there is if the underlying parts are there first. That, like, it could be the case that neurons communicate with each other, they have an experience, or they don't have an experience, but they cause this emergent experience to happen. Who's to say that there's not a conscious experience overlying this crowd, or a state, or a country? And how would we even begin to observe it?
Well, something like that is a project, and you, like, unravel the strings of your confusion piece by piece. And I'm not necessarily saying that like there is merely physical explanation for why you talk about consciousness and therefore no such thing as consciousness. I am saying that if we're going to define that, if like consciousness as this thing we look at and become confused is our handle on where to even locate inside reality, the thing we're trying to talk about and be confused about. So if you say that like consciousness is unrelated to your feelings of confusion as they appear inside your brain and the words that you speak about consciousness, like, then I really do think you've like ended up in some like weird side corner of philosophical corners one talks oneself into. Like,
I mean,
consciousness would have something to do with why you're talking about consciousness, or what are we even talking about?
Sure, I definitely agree they're related, but like a question that's very difficult, I think it's called hydrocephalus, where you can have diseases or issues that go on with the brain where there's a lot of water and there's a lot of brain missing. There are some people that can be reported. I want to say the most dramatic case was a guy that I feel like the scan showed he had like 20% of his brain there, but outwardly he appeared to be thinking, feeling, having a conscious experience like anybody else. Like, is that a philosophical zombie? Like, can we
No.
even know that? Or you said
I
no?
I would strongly guess that wasn't philosophical zombie.
How could you know that when so much of the underlying machinery that we would imagine would like he's got less of a brain than a baby does, right?
Baby brains.
Babies have brains. They're there.
Yeah, they're small.
They're smaller, but they're definitely there.
I have to check with the volume compared to adults' volume. Like
This
how
guy's
many
volume,
neurons
his
are
brain
there.
was very small, very low volume brain.
So for one thing, I kind of like want to actually check out this case study before I draw deep conclusions.
Sure, of course,
based on it.
which is fair, yeah.
For another, like, like if you ask this person, like, are you conscious? And they're like, what are you talking about? Then I would, but if then, like that's one thing. If you ask this person, like, are you conscious? And they like sort of like play back something from that they read in the Journal of Consciousness Studies as a kid or something, LLMs can do that too. Unfortunately, I think parenthetically, I think we should like exclude all the talk about consciousness from the data sets we train the AIs on, so that if they ever spontaneously start talking about that without having heard any humans talking about that, we'd be able to notice. But close parenthetical. So like when you stare at something confusing, there's often like this thing that's confusing and that thing that's confusing, and how could this possibly be true? How could this possibly be true? And you want to like follow the one thread you have and set all the confusions aside. And the thread I was suggesting that you follow is the thread to like, what is shaping in detail my experience of looking at consciousness and being confused about it? Not what is consciousness such that it confuses me, but like, what are the momentary shaping forces whereby my confusion ends up in this exact shape? I don't think we actually have time to go into
that's
here.
fine.
I think like I can just sort of like discourse upon the way of resolving confusing things, which is not to like hop about between all the different pieces that confuse you one after another and like look in any direction in despair because it doesn't explain everything at once. It's like, find a thread you can pull and pull it.
Well, that was the baby question.
That was a baby question.
I'm not convinced that they're not conscious, but that was an interesting conversation, so I was satisfied.
Okay, yeah. The main thing I want to say, sort of like, is there a part of you that knows in real life that, of course, there's going to turn out to be like an explanation in terms of atoms, not mere atoms, but just that there was something all these atoms were doing that felt from the inside like this very confusing consciousness stuff. But in the end, there wasn't miraculous physics, there wasn't extra causal stuff, there wasn't anything inherently mysterious. There was just a thing you were ignorant about and confused about.
That would be my guess. My guess would be...
Well, then obviously babies are not conscious. No, sorry.
Okay,
Sorry,
yeah,
carry on.
Yeah, my guess would be is that there is... I think it's fallacious to assume that humans evolved to perceive everything that exists. That I don't know. I haven't heard a compelling argument for that. So it might be the fact that there are other things that exist, extra material, we might say, that we don't have the ability to perceive. Maybe consciousness exists in that realm where we can't see it, but another type of being could, or has different types of sensory things, but I'm not entirely sure there.
I mean, I would say of that there could be a universe attached to ours such that we're inside its causal closure, but it's not inside our causal closure. Like there could be a whole universe of particles that interact with the particles in our universe and each other, but none of the particles that we think of as being our universe interact with the extra particles. But of these things, we cannot speak. We cannot see them. We don't even have a good way to refer to them. If you imagine like some prankster aliens up in a universe with more computing power than this one, they could simulate our universe and our universe plus like weird universe 1 interacting with it, and our universe plus like weird universe 2 like being interacted with by our universe but not interacting with it in turn. Like causal arrows go from our universe to there, but no causal arrows going back. So actually I'm not going to go into that rabbit hole because of time, but Isekai. So the obvious hypothesis about isekais is that like it's a universe that causally descends from yours but doesn't send causal projections going back the other way. Anyways, but then how do then you can't even talk about the things there. You don't have any way of saying like you can be like, there's a ghost in my bedroom that doesn't causally interact with me in any way. And I'm like, how do you know? How are you even talking about it? In all there's this enormous variety of possible universes with different that descend causally from our universe and send no projections back. You have no way of poking down any one of them unless you talk about like that thing you saw, that thing you heard, that thing that causally interacted with you in some way, and that's how the words even come to mean a thing that causally interacted with you. It's something that doesn't causally interact with you at all. You literally cannot talk about because you have no way for your words to pin down you mean that thing as opposed to something else.
Yeah, I think I largely agree. You can't really talk about things you have no perception of. I'm just saying that it's not inconceivable to me that these other types of things could be a thing that we just don't have the ability to perceive, that interact in a way that's hard for us. Maybe like theoretically the explanation for gravitational forces in the universe, like the dark matter we're looking for.
But then the dark matter is causing gravity. We can talk about the dark matter because we can talk about
yeah, but I don't think right now we even know if dark matter exists, right? We're looking for, like, there's not enough matter to account for the gravitational forces in our expanding universe right now. I think that's a big mystery for astrophysics, right?
We can talk about that thing that causes galaxies to rotate faster than we think they should.
Sure.
Like,
but what if the thing that's emitting that gravitational effect is something that's existing outside of our ability to ever perceive it? Like, is that unfathomable? Is that totally not?
I'd say it's incoherent because we are able to perceive its effect upon our universe in the form of the galaxies rotating faster. We may not be able to like measure it by means other than using galaxies as measuring devices, but the galaxies are right there being measuring devices, and that's how we're able to talk about them.
Here's something I'm curious. Do you think that it's possible that like a fourth dimensional creature could leave a footprint in a three-dimensional world? And that we would never be able to perceive the creature, but we could perceive an effect on our world as a result of his, I guess, meddling in.
I don't know what it means to say that I can never perceive that speaker there. I can only perceive the photons impinging upon my retina.
Well, isn't that exactly what we say with dark matter, though? We can't perceive the matter, but we perceive the gravitational effect of something that we can't find?
Yeah, like everything except for my qualia is something whose existence I infer from the patterns it makes in my qualia.
Well, but I think the problem with the inference here, though, is that we're inferring something that we literally have absolutely no way to account for. Most of the things we infer from our qualia have direct things that I'm pretty sure we find, in, like blue and red correspond to waves on the electromagnetic spectrum, or things that we hear refer to sound pressure waves in the air, but when it comes to galaxies moving in a certain direction, we can't find the matter there. It seems unaccounted for. Like we can't even find it right now. Is that...
I'm not seeing a basic theoretical distinction. There's just like the patterns that stuff outside of us makes in our sensory information, and we have stories about what's doing it, and these are the hypotheses, and the ones that make very good predictions, we say are thereby confirmed over their prior probabilities. And I just don't see a fundamental distinction between dark matter making galaxies rotate faster and the light from those stars and coming into telescopes, and like sunlight bounces off of the speaker and goes into my retina and gets transduced into neural impulses, and then is like information consonant with the rest of my brain, and I'm like, oh, there's a speaker over there. But to me, this feels like exactly the same sort of thing. Maybe some things are like provide more employment to physicists because they're harder to pin down, but they're not qualitatively harder to pin down. They're just like you just have to employ additional physicists.
Okay, well, I think babies are conscious, so...
Yes, but that's because consciousness seems like a very simple and mysterious thing that, for all you know, could be present in babies. If you actually knew the real story there, it would be predictably the case that no matter what you learned, it could be something that might be absent from babies that are much simpler than toddlers. So you'll update in a predictable direction on this issue as you come to learn more about consciousness, and you can figure that even in advance of knowing what the explanation is.
All right, well, what's the next market for us? What time are we
We're out of time.
Oh, are we out of time? All right. Well, hey, say goodbye or something. Jeez, right?
And in conclusion, I'm not actually saying that you should eat babies. Many people have misinterpreted my stance on probably newborn babies don't have qualia as saying that it would be okay to directly load them into catapults and fling them. And I'm not saying that. There's reasons to not do that. Those babies could eventually come to bed in prediction markets.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun chatting. I appreciate it. Yep. Have a good one, guys.